Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Vazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Egg Whisperer Show. I'm super excited to have Dr. Allen here with us. Dr. Allen, please say hi and introduce yourself for us.
Hi everyone, my name is Coleman Allen and I am a mental health professional in the field of infertility, or fertility, I like to say. And tonight we're going to be talking about surrogacy and how to have a healthy emotional journey.
So did you watch the Golden Globes this past Sunday?
I did not.
You didn't? Okay, so I did.
Traveling.
And as I'm watching the Golden Globes, I saw Juliana Rancic talking on the red carpet and I said, yes, she used a surrogate. Then I saw Nicole Kidman and I said, yes, she used a surrogate. And then I saw Sarah Jessica Parker and I said, yes, she used a surrogate. But the thing is that surrogates aren't just for the rich and famous. They are for everyday people who want to have their family grow, but they can't with their uterus depending on the situation that they're in, right?
That is absolutely true.
Right.
There's so many people.
You and I see these patients all the time. And in a world of basically chaos, I mean, you just click on the news, you can see what's going around outside in the world. You and I want peace and harmony. We want relationships that work, and we want really beautiful surrogacy journeys. And you and I see that all the time. That's
right. We want the best for people on both sides of a surrogacy journey because it can be a beautiful, beautiful thing.
It really is.
Challenging, but absolutely a beautiful journey.
It really is. So my husband, I love him to death. Honey, hi, I know you're watching. Okay, so he goes and he buys me all sorts of really cool things. And he came home yesterday with this shirt, and it's a Wonder Woman t-shirt. And I said, how did you know? I'm doing an episode on surrogacy. And to me, every single surrogate is literally a superhero walking among us. Don't you think?
I think so. They are angels, superheroes, whatever label you want to put on them that is magnificent. They really are a generous, amazingly generous group.
Right. And so sometimes people are a little like, why would anyone want to do that? And I can tell you, once you meet a surrogate, you know why. They love being mothers. They love being pregnant. And the thought of doing it for someone else, they're like, sign me up. They're not making millions of dollars. You know, they're making anywhere from, let's say, on the lower end, $20,000 to $25,000, on the higher end, around $60,000 for a surrogacy journey. And with enough financial planning, a family can afford that. It might take longer than, let's say, 6 months. It could take a year, 3 years, 5 years. But if you plan out that amount of money, it is something that could be doable for people who need it.
It's absolutely true. And sometimes it can come for free if someone is willing to.
If it's a compassionate surrogacy, a family member, a friend, a coworker, certainly there are carriers that are like, why do I need to be paid for doing something that just means I'm a really good human being? Yeah. So I want to talk through the process, and we've received dozens of emailed questions, and I definitely want to go through those tonight. But the first thing I want to talk through is, what kind of role does a fertility psychologist play in this arrangement? On the surrogate side, on the intended parent side, can you talk to us about, let's just start with the surrogate side and what you do?
Okay, so with the surrogate side, I either am referred surrogates through an agency, through a clinic, such as yours, or sometimes people just find me on their own after they've matched independently. And so on the surrogate side, we do a psychological evaluation, which includes a psychological questionnaire, so personality questionnaire, either the PAI or the MMPI, so the two standards in the field. And then there's a clinical interview, which also includes the partner of the surrogate if she has one. And so that's a process that takes a bit of time. And then there is the scoring profiling of the questionnaire, and then the report from the clinical interview. And the interview covers a lot, so it can cover covers family history, mental health history, sexual history, any arrest history, certainly motivation for being a surrogate, how a partner feels about it if a partner is part of the process, if there is a partner, and coaching. I mean, I do a lot of coaching on kind of how to prepare for the process and what to expect. and then how to work with situations if they come up, and just so the surrogate will know that this isn't it. If they have questions or concerns down the road, they can always call me back.
And so have you ever had a surrogate where you've actually screened and said, I don't think this is for you? Can you tell us about those situations, and what are the most common reasons why a surrogate actually may not make it through the psychological assessment process?
So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine does have guidelines, of course, on surrogacy evaluations on the medical side as well as the mental health side. So those are pretty strictly followed. Right. So some of those include severe history of postpartum depression, right, any current uses of medication for depression, and there's so many people who use medication for many things. Whether it's PMS, they're on some low dose of SSRI or something like that. So I try to put everything in context and get history if there is, some previous usage of medication. So that could be a rule out if there's some severe postpartum depression, because we don't want this to be a negative experience for the surrogate, her children, or her family, right? You want this to be something she can manage after the journey is done without too much fallout. And then if there's just major issues with the spouse, just a tumultuous time, maybe they're moving. If there's a lot of stress, we talk about, hey, this doesn't rule you out. It just means maybe this is not the right time to move forward.
Right, and the partner has to be on board as well.
Absolutely.
And I've seen cases where a surrogate was really excited to move forward. These aren't patients of mine, but stories that people have shared with me, and the partner wasn't supportive, and that caused the surrogate to have severe postpartum depression after she actually delivered the baby for that intended parent. And then now her relationship is in shambles, and now she has to deal with that, and that's not something that we really want. We want to make sure every family stays intact and grows and is happy and peaceful.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Because they come in wanting to do good.
Yes, exactly. So let's start off with one really important question. And I think when you've struggled so much with fertility issues, and your family has seen you go through that. I mean, I think a lot of families, when you present that to them and say, hi guys, you know all the stuff I've been through, we've decided to use a surrogate, and I bet there's a lot of extended family out there that would be like, yes, we're here to support you, what can we do, we're here to be on your team. But I'm sure you find situations and hear of stories where people and their extended family, they're maybe not as supportive. So how do you recommend people should share this news with family? When should they share? How do they answer their questions that might be a little bit strange? And I'm sure you've heard of lots and lots of things. So what do you recommend as a fertility psychologist?
So with any, whether it's third-party reproduction or any assisted reproduction, actually, there can be a variety of different scenarios. I think it depends often on culture, on family dynamics, on privacy needs of the individual, sort of the acceptance of these types of assisted reproduction journeys. Sometimes it's that parents will just worry too much about whether this is going to hurt. And I hear that a lot, is that, my mother's really worried about me, about this hurting me, or that I'm going to, die or something. And so, so sometimes it's just fear on the other side for your child if they're going to undergo a surrogacy journey. And I'm talking about the surrogate side now.
Got it.
If it's the intended parent side, then how do you tell your family that you are moving forward with this journey? And again, is assisted reproduction accepted in the family? Sometimes I suggest just using a little children's book, and there are lots and lots out there. I can post a list when we're done. People can email me, and I can send you an extensive list of it. But it's something as simple as this. There's a the kangaroo pouch has been around forever, but it's a very simple little story, and sometimes that's just the easiest way to share with family that you're going through something like this, because it's simple.
Well, that's really sweet. It sounds like it's a good storybook also for children born through surrogacy as well.
Yeah, but it's
okay. So let's just get to our questions. There are so many for us to answer. Is there a typical process of emotions that intended parents tend to experience in their journey?
Yes. It depends on how much trauma they're coming off of before they are beginning their surrogacy journey. So sometimes they're healing as they're preparing for their surrogacy journey. And so I'll try to work with those intended parents to try to continue the healing process. They don't want to step out for a year or two sometimes just to kind of do that grief work, but it's important. So you don't want someone who's completely burned out by their experiences to undergo, the initiation of a surrogacy journey. Just they should be patched up a little bit after such an emotional traumatic experiences such as loss and things like that that can happen. So anxiety certainly about the surrogacy journey. Wanting a loss of control is huge for intended parents, and that's not across the board really, because I see that more with women who have lost the ability to carry, more so than women who have known from early age that they weren't able to carry. That's less anxiety in that case. And then of course, when you have men working with a surrogate, there's some anxiety, but it's a different kind of anxiety. It's not control over, I've lost the control of my uterus, and how do I manage that? So it's just different for every family, I feel like.
So what do you recommend? And I think the best answer is to work with someone like you who's there as a partner. You can check in with them as you're having these emotions so that you can go through different sort of exercises to help you through the process. But what would be the best tip you can give for someone who's feeling anxiety? Let's just start with that one.
So there are lots of different tips. I mean, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. There is, taking exercise is excellent. Making sure you get plenty of vitamin D. So there's some natural things that one can do, nutrition. But mindful meditation is excellent, and you can do it, within a few seconds at your desk if you need to. So it's just taking very slow, deep belly breaths, and then closing your eyes and taking those cycles of breath, and then just noticing what's around you once you open your eyes. And it pulls what I call the freight train of the brain back into the station and into the moment, and away from worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or in 3 months or, what's my surrogate doing every moment of the day. So
I feel very relaxed now after the last 10 seconds of you talking to me. I feel very zen. Okay, so what about the loss of control aspect? What kind of tips can you give us about that? How do you deal with that? I mean, you have now trusted this, wonderful woman, to be the ultimate babysitter for 9 months, and she's going to give the baby back to you in 9 months. But how do you deal with that loss of control? What do you recommend?
So, and I think it depends on what experience the intended parent has had. Have they gone through their own IVF cycles that have failed? Have they delivered a baby that hasn't survived, or have they had losses? So it just depends on really their experience coming forward into the journey. We always have an intended parent session, or we're supposed to, right? So anyone going through surrogacy should be having a consultation with a mental health professional in this field. And in those consultations, there's some coaching in there as well about what to expect and how you may feel, and that there is help if you want a touch point along the way, just to call whoever it is that you're working with, or have worked with, or if you have a therapist on board, just touch base with that person. But really just to keep the line of communication open and don't suffer in silence. It's really, really important that I feel like anxiety is normalized in this process, and that relationship with a surrogate should build over time. It doesn't have to be a rushed, I'm going to be best friends with you immediately. I mean, that's, you want that foundation to grow of mutual respect and trust. It's really hard to trust someone with the biggest job you could ever imagine, after just a few meetings. But that's how surrogacy works, and you have to trust in the parties that are helping you with the process, such as someone like yourself, the attorney.
Yeah, and one of the things I talk to my patients about is, meeting, like you mentioned, the partner of the surrogate, meeting their children, maybe meeting their friends, like meeting them out for coffee or breakfast, and maybe having a friend of theirs come. And if they are a repeat surrogate, talk to the family that they cared for before. And I always talk to the surrogates that have done it before. I say, what worked really, really well. And it's always a good sign when they say that the worst thing that happened was their epidural didn't work as well. Right? I mean, that's a good sign. Or if a surrogate switched agencies, talk to them about, what was it about that agency experience that you didn't like? Because it's important to me, if a surrogate is going to carry a pregnancy for a family of mine, I want to know all these things in advance so I can prepare everybody, because I want as enjoyable of an experience for both the intended parent and the surrogate, so that after the baby is born, they're just having so much fun with each other, sharing pictures and showing signs of gratitude as this baby is turning into a child and an adult even.
Absolutely. It can be a very wonderful shared journey without any sort of, worry that someone is overtaking your role or anything like that. I mean, it can be a beautiful process.
So many, I'll say intended mothers, for example, they become surrogates because they've had, let's say, several miscarriages. Okay, or they've had a hysterectomy for whatever reason and have never had a chance to be pregnant or even experience a pregnancy, even if it's an early pregnancy. And so, do you think it's a good idea for that intended mother to share her fears, her worries with the surrogate? Or do you think it's better for her to have someone else to talk to and not necessarily talk to the surrogate about things like that? What do you recommend?
So my initial recommendation would be to kind of save those inner fears and insecurities for the mental health session, and then on from there if some more counseling and consultation is recommended. However, I'll say that I've seen it done the other way as well. If it's an experienced surrogate and she's been through this several times, and you have a new intended parent who's never carried before, doesn't know what to expect. So a lot of times the surrogate will take on that sort of, it's not like a parenting almost role, but it's more of that sort of nurturing role in helping ease the mind of the intended parent. So I've seen it work both ways, and it can work both ways. I think the majority of time I would say start with your mental health professional, but that is not always the case.
And how can an intended parent support the surrogate? Do you have any tips on how they can show the surrogate, either through just nice lovely cards, flowers at the embryo transfer? What kinds of things have you seen that intended parents do for their surrogates along the way that improve the relationship and that bond?
Sometimes intended parents feel like they have to go big with gifts and things like that, and I feel like at the beginning of the process that is that just gets too, I think it gets too much for the intended parents and possibly for the surrogate too. I'm sure surrogates love being spoiled, but I'd say, start with cards and flowers. You don't have to do big, splashy, expensive gifts. I know some people do, but I recommend keeping it simple, keeping it heartfelt, and not feeling like you have to spend a lot of money, extra money on your surrogate. You're already spending so much, just, with medical appointments and things like that, and the attorney's fees. So I just feel like definitely making the effort to be sure your surrogate is comfortable, but not to feel like you're going overboard, because the surrogate may not feel comfortable with that as well. So even having a conversation with your surrogate and say, would it be okay if I sent you a card just to cheer you on here and there or something like that. So that hurts to check.
I would say a lot of the families that I work with, they'll meet in my office ahead of time. They'll go out to breakfast, or they'll go out to lunch afterwards, or maybe it's a later appointment. They'll all go out to dinner. They do things that are social and fun, and just to show how much they're supporting each other along the way during their visits. So you kind of touched on this, and this is a really good question that I was emailed. So are there things that intended parents do that they think are supportive but really aren't? And I think part of it is probably going too overboard.
So yes, it could be, because again, it depends on the personalities, right? So some surrogates really don't want to be kind of made over. Like, I don't like a lot of gifts. I don't like, big gushy cards, anything like that. So really kind of check it out with your surrogate, or maybe her partner, if she has one, to be sure the personality. But I also feel like if you're checking up on your surrogate a lot because you feel like it's going to be helpful to remind them to take their medication or their injections, or remind them, what to eat, or about their vitamins or whatever, that is probably more of an internal issue for the intended parent than it is helpful for the surrogate.
Well, honestly, there are apps now for that. So NAULA app, N-A-U-L-A, is one that I tell my patients to use, and it's like, then you don't have to feel like this. The surrogate doesn't have to feel like she's constantly being checked up on, and then the intended parent doesn't have to feel like she has to babysit with following the medication calendar and making sure that the surrogate took her medications every night. So that's a nice, easy way through technology to kind of take that stress out of the relationship, for sure.
Absolutely.
So what are some things that you see work well in a surrogacy relationship? And I know we've been talking about that, but can you just give me like top 3 things that you think are super important to have in order to have like the most emotionally healthy surrogacy ever?
Okay. So I think certainly getting all of the the team together, having a physician that you trust, so someone like yourself, Dr. Amy, and then having a legal representative, a lawyer, an attorney who knows surrogacy, and so each party will have their own attorney or representation, and certainly having a mental health professional on board to do the screenings, the intended parent consultations, and the group meeting to be sure everybody's on the same page. And then, so really having your team in place and having clear expectations up front. So these things kind of go together because these things will be in the legal contract. How does one feel, or where are the decision-making capabilities going to fall when it comes to termination, if there's a chromosomal issue with the fetus, selective reduction if there are multiples, is the surrogate giving the rights to those decisions to the intended parents? And these are really, really super important to be clear about up front, because no one can force a surrogate to undergo surgery with her own uterus,
That's
right? So really want to be sure that the communication is clear. You know, do they need a more structured set of communication during the week, or is it just going to see how things flow and hope for the best? A lot of these things are covered in the group meeting and individual meetings as well, but well, all of these are. But just clear expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to know that, you know, there are things in place so that people have, I think a lot of the anxiety for intended parents is what to expect, how often should they check in with their carrier, but I say, you know, make sure if you and your carrier aren't like super chatty, at least have one day a week, maybe every Friday at 10 a.m. where you have this agreed upon thing where the intended parent emails and checks in and you reply right away. So there's no anxiety about like, where's my surrogate? What is she doing? Why isn't she replying? You know, what's going on? So the intended parent doesn't feel as much of that loss of control, because certainly there is that aspect of this. And, you know, like I said, a surrogate is the ultimate babysitter, and we know that that baby always is well taken care of when we go through all this due diligence ahead of time. What are some things that you think that surrogates love to see their intended parents do, as far as like for them, not just, I mean, we talked about like the little things like a card, but one thing that they really want to see their intended parents do during their journey that makes the journey really smooth?
That's a great question. So there's during the journey, and then there's at the tail end of the journey. I think during the journey, it's really just trying to keep their own health in place. You know, the intended parents making sure they're staying mentally healthy. And clear in communications. I think surrogates, they just want to be able to do what they're good at. You know, they're great at carrying babies. They have their own families to raise and to manage. And there's a lot that goes on for a surrogate during a journey. And I think for intended parents to be healthy, mentally healthy, to communicate enough, but not too much, meaning like not 10 times a day going, have you done your meds and all those things. I think that's one of the greatest things that you can give a surrogate. And then I think just, if you can be there for appointments, that's great.
And with technology, you can use FaceTime, you can use Skype. There's so many ways to make sure that you're tuned in at the appointments if you physically can't get there, if let's say your surrogate's out of state.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that I hear from the surrogates is that just the amazing joy that comes at the birth. I mean, it gives me chills just thinking about it, because it's just such an amazingly emotionally beautiful moment. And the surrogates love it. I know the intended parents love it, but the surrogates love it too.
So I want to talk about something that is probably the worst part of my job, and that's dealing with something that is often part of the human experience, and that is miscarriage. And that's the hardest thing for surrogates, because they become surrogates because they've never had a miscarriage. They've never experienced this. And now all of a sudden we're using someone else's DNA, we're putting in their uterus, and we're hoping it's going to stick and grow. And sometimes things just don't work out. So some of the things that I see that sometimes can make the relationship a little bit bumpy is now the surrogate has experienced a loss, and now the surrogate is getting no support from the intended parent. You know, there's no communication. So I think it's really important that a surrogate has someone like you on their team so they can talk to you and you can kind of be that sort of mediator in situations like this. And certainly I act as that mediator as well and try to do everything possible just to explain to everyone about how everyone's feeling on either side. And this is something that I'm sure you talk to surrogates as well. You know, if something goes on in the pregnancy, certainly they shouldn't blame themselves at all.
Absolutely. And surrogates, when there is a miscarriage, and there's so much nature at play here. I mean, all the little miracles still have to happen to make a pregnancy work, and you're giving it the best chance it can. But nature's a big part of this, and so we know sometimes things happen with in nature. And so if there is a miscarriage, yes, surrogates do tend to blame themselves sometimes, and unfortunately, sometimes intended parents blame the surrogates, and that's a really challenging situation because you can do everything right, and something can still happen. We just don't have all the information at the time. So, so yes, I think both having an outlet for grieving and for support, and I do bring up miscarriage, especially with surrogates, because I encourage them, to be sure that counseling is built into the contract, which most often it is, that they would have access to counseling throughout the journey, and if there is a loss. And just to be sure that they know that there's just, you can do everything right, and once in a while something happens, and just to please reach out. Again, not to suffer in silence about this, about anything you're going through with the surrogacy journey, because they do come in to help.
Right, and that's one of the things I talk to everybody about is, if we transfer this embryo and it doesn't work, I want to talk about that in advance. I want to talk about how we're going to deal with that as a team and what we're going to do from here. And so those kinds of conversations are really important to have up front. Hopefully we don't have to deal with things like that. But like I said, I mean, it's part of the human experience, and we can all do our very, very best. But at the end of the day, it is up to nature, after using all the scientific technology, as to whether that embryo is going to turn into a live birth or not.
That's right. And I think it's just so amazing that you do have these conversations, because it just shows the depth of feeling that you have for your clients and your patients.
And I'm super happy, obviously, to have you as a fellow egg whisperer in Georgia, talking to all the families and helping families grow. So I just want to say thank you so much for being on tonight's show. We love having you on. I'm sure this episode is going to be watched over and over by surrogates, by intended parents, and we're going to post a link to your contact information, and we'll post your email address. So if people want to use you during their surrogacy journey, if they have more questions, they want to do a consult with you, they certainly can. And thank you everyone for watching tonight's show. Remember, every surrogate is a Wonder Woman, and every intended parent who is using a surrogate, I mean, I think you're awesome for going through, or going, through all you've gone through to finally be at that point where you're going to use one. And I just have to say that I have patients who, I don't know, Dr. Allen, if you saw the video, but I have patients that just went public with their surrogacy journey, and I'll post that video as well, and it's a very sweet story. So thank you again for your time. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope to see you next week also. Have a great night.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Vazadeh.
And you have yet another success story.
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the